Joining me on the telecast, first off, is Mr. Rob Alexander, who lost his father in the tragic Kanishka bombing of 1985. Rob, my first question to you, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX. And what was the reason that your family, your father, was visiting India?
At the time, he was going to go see his mother, who was not doing well health-wise, so he thought it would be wise to go see her in case something were to happen while we were still in Canada. So he made that trip at that time for that reason.
And how and when did you hear about the terror attack? Obviously, first off, it was not being determined that it was a terror attack. Obviously, there was much speculation about it. There was probes that happened. But when did you come to know about this incident?
Well, we, my mom, my brother, sister, and I were still back home in Hamilton, Ontario. We got a phone call that morning. I believe it was around 6:30 in the morning. And there was another party from the Indian community who was asking my mom, because again, at that time, Air India only had one flight going per week. So everyone in the community knew who was going when, because there was only one flight. So that gentleman was calling my mom to see if a mutual friend of theirs, was going to India and was on that Air India flight, not knowing that my father was booked to travel. And so that person called around 6:30 in the morning, and my mom picked up the phone, and he asked if that party was on the plane, and she didn't know. She said she didn't know, and she said why, and she said the gentleman said that the plane, there was in the news that the plane had gone down, that we didn't know it was a bombing or a terror attack at the time. We didn't know for many days even if there was any survivors. The government was not very good at communicating that fact, and they probably didn't know it themselves, truthfully, but we were kind of in the dark for a long time.
And how did you feel back in the time you lost your father? That's the information that you got over the phone call. How did you cope? How did you and your family cope with this sudden loss? Obviously, your mother was left to fend for herself, and all of you and two of your younger siblings.
Well, again, we didn't know. It was probably a few days that we were told that there was no survivors. It was just really shock and disbelief, because we didn't know about any bomb threats. We didn't know any of the leading up to the problem, the bombing. We didn't know about the bomb threats that Air India knew about. We didn't know that the RCMP here in Canada had been warned that they were targeting something for Air India. So we were just shocked that this was even happening to us and in Canada. And my father being at the wrong place at the wrong time, he was unfortunately on that flight right in the middle of that. So we were just numb and shocked. I don't know what else to say on that. Just couldn't believe it.
Now, Rob, do you think the Canadian government has done enough for the families of the victims of the terror attack?
Not even close, I would say, in my opinion. They haven't acknowledged much about the bombing. There was an inquiry, and there was lots of recommendations as a result of that inquiry, but we feel that it's gone on deaf ears, because the government of today doesn't pay any attention to it. And that's very clear and very evident in terms of how they prioritize things. But right now, like, the inquiry had lots of good things to say that would protect Canadians and address some of the concerns that the Air India bombing brought up, in particular how families were treated, liability, in terms of who knew, and the fact that the government knew and they had the duty to warn Canadians, and they didn't do anything close to that. There's lots of information in the inquiry documents that the government was even RCMP and CSIS were watching the people in question and didn't do anything. So, in terms of done enough, they've got a long way to go, and it's been 38 years, and a lot of people have passed on and won't see justice. If justice is another thing that is even attainable, we don't even know.
And were you and your family satisfied with the court verdict back in the day and the legal proceedings that were brought forth in the case?
Unfortunately not. I'm realistic in the fact that it was the first time Canada in general was trying a terrorist trial. And it turns out, I remember going to the trials in Vancouver and then hearing the verdict many months later that they didn't have the burden of proof to convict these two guys. But it was very clear from the evidence that these were the guys that perpetrated the crimes. But being a one-judge panel and not having the burden of proof, they didn't convict them. So it would be nice for them to reopen the trial if there's proper evidence, but it was a big waste of time and money at the time, but they had to try, I guess. But in terms of being satisfied with the verdict, of course not.
Now, if you take a look back at the trial, there was only one person by the name of Rayat who was found guilty, and it was not over a terror charge against him. He was charged of manslaughter. Why do you think the Canadian authorities were not able to nail down the perpetrators of the terror attack?
That's a good question. I think it has to do with a lot of what I just said in terms of not investigating it properly. There was people who knew about what led up to the bombing were not willing to testify. They didn't urge them enough to testify with information that they knew. People were probably afraid as well. They didn't want to testify against known terrorists in the country, and knowing what they knew and what happened to Air India. Why would people want to put themselves in jeopardy? There's that fear. I'm not sure why they couldn't do it. It seemed like they did a good job, and they see leading up to the end of the trial, but obviously that wasn't the case according to the judge's opinion.
Now, one of the many accused in the terror attack, Ajay Singh Bagri, continues to roam free in Surrey. What would you want the government of Canada and the police forces in Canada to do? Would you want the case to be reopened?
Well, again, that's to do with the trial. And if there was sufficient evidence to go back and retry, in Canada, there's that double jeopardy law applies, and you can't retry for the same thing unless there's new evidence that has come up, is my understanding. And it's been a long time. It's been more than a lifetime, unfortunately, to put up with this, and the lack of attention from the government and the legal system. It would be good for the government and the legal system to acknowledge what's happened and convict these people who have perpetrated the crimes, whoever it is, whether it's that guy or someone else. Someone obviously put this plan into place from the Canadian side, but the families have not been done right by in both instances, from the Canadian government and the legal side.
Now, Rob, do you also think that the Canadian government has given safe haven to Khalistani extremists and terrorists in Canada?
I think by tolerating banned terrorist organizations in Canada, they tolerate and indirectly give safe haven. I do think that they don't, in some of the parades that they have in BC, they have known people who have associated with these groups, and they venerate and they celebrate them, and the authorities do nothing to stop that. So that kind of spits in the memory of the face of the memory of our lost loved ones. So that's not very good, and it's not respectful. It's not doesn't give a good environment to families who've lost loved ones as a direct result of these groups spreading hate and their own, political and religious agenda. That's not very fair to the families and the lost loved ones.
Thank you, Rob Alexander, for joining us on this very special telecast, telling us your story of grief and sorrow and the horror when you lost your father, and a difficult time that you and your family has had to face in the last 38 years.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.